Have you ever wondered why there is so much stigma around medication for mental health challenges? Or about the risks and benefits of psychedelics for depression, trauma, anxiety, and other challenges that face lots of people in the United States and worldwide today? Well, today I'm talking to Dr. Alex Dimitriu, a nationally recognized psychiatrist who has helped thousands of people feel, perform, and sleep better. We'll be covering what diagnoses benefit from medication, why there is so much stigma around medication, and we'll be talking about psychedelics, the benefits, the risks, and how to approach them. Alex, great to have you and welcome. Alex, you have an absolutely fascinating background. Your dad is an engineer and your mom a pianist, right?
Yep.
So you have this really fascinating mix of art and science, and I know you bring this to your work. And in addition to that, you are dual board certified as a sleep specialist and in psychiatry, right? And even more, to add to these accolades, you have been featured in the New York Times, Men's Health, Cosmopolitan, NBC, Business Insider. Am I missing something? Probably a
There's been
few
a
more.
few, but first of all, thank you for having me. It has been a delight working with you for the number of years that we've already worked together, and it's wonderful to be on your show as well. As we've discussed before, I think we both love the work that we do, and we're so fortunate to work where we do with the people that we work with. But so much of the work that we do, I think, is really kind of bringing it back to the simple things and getting people to move from their mind back into their hearts and their bodies. And it's amazing how much our bodies can do to heal themselves when given the space to do so. And what I've loved about our work together is just how like-minded we are. And I think your patients and clients are certainly fortunate to have you as their therapist. And it really is an honor, I think, to do the work that we do and to see people's lives change the way they have.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, I feel the same way.
And I'll tell you, for me, I think the interplay of psychiatry and sleep really brings it back to the body, because, what is the ultimate state of rest than sleep, and it's such an essential part of how our minds operate and how we feel all day and our attitudes about things. And I think this day, the further we've gotten away from, the fire in the woods, the less sleep we get, the more stressed we are, and the more screens we're on, and the more help we need. And I think it's, I think that the days of the stigmatization of psychotherapy and psychology, I hope, are long behind us, because I think these days, how do you expect to drive the sports car that is your mind without regular tune-ups? You know what I mean? Most delicate, intricate, precise machines need maintenance and need some guidance, I think. And that's where I think, especially where you and I practice, it's essential to keep all systems tuned in.
Very true. And I actually want to come back to sleep, because sleep, I know, is very, very important, not just for my own work, but also working with you. Before I do that, I want to ask a little bit about the stigma around medication. I know this is a topic you think about a lot, and I just recently watched this great documentary on HBO, what is it called? The Crime of the Century, about the opioid crisis, right? So we're so quick to address physical pain, right, with opioids and other medications, even over the counter, right? We're very quick to do that. Why is there so much stigma around psychotropics, so medication for, let's say, emotional pain?
It's a very good question. And I've often, the book I hope to write is going to have a chapter called Meditation or Medication. And the real fundamental question is, like, at what point, do people need to try harder? Whether they need to meditate more or stick to more, life behavioral interventions, or they need to use a calm app at night, or they need to meditate more. And at what point do you need to say, hey, this is just kind of like a square peg through a round hole? And the answer is not to bear down and grit through it, but to actually recognize that we're all born different. I think human temperament is something that's evident from birth. I'll often refer to my own two children, that they're just so different. One is jumpy and excitable, and the other one is mellow and loves to sleep a lot. And they were that way from 6 months of birth, 6 months from the time they were born. And truly, I see so many patients in my practice where I think, they've been through a lot of behavioral interventions, and they've toughed it out, and they've tried to do cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. They've been in therapy for years, and they've just been stuck. And my approach to the way the human mind works, I think fundamentally, we have some very fundamental drives. I think things like energy, mood, anxiety, how loopy we are, how impulsive we are. A lot of these things are variable day to day, but fundamentally, I do think that we have a certain biological set point. In the extreme examples, I have patients with severe anxiety or depression where you'll find out that their grandmother was anxious as well, and their parents were anxious, and they're anxious, and their children are anxious. And for some of these people, I mean, I'm a total believer in the behavioral interventions and therapy, but at some point, I think if somebody has a broken leg, the answer is not to anesthetize them or get them to think past it, but at some point to actually address the broken leg. And even as I say that, I can't say that medications cure the broken leg or the broken spirit, but I think for a lot of people, medications are kind of like, especially psychiatric medications, it's almost like getting an anesthetic at the dentist's office. You're going to get a root canal one way or the other. You're going to have to continue and go back to your job tomorrow and deal with your boss. At least in the case of anxiety, I think some people are born to just feel too much. I've often compared anxiety to like the care spectrum. There's people that care too little, and there's people that care too much. And I think for some people that suffer from intense anxiety, everything is hard. It's almost like driving through life without shock absorbers, and every little thing throws you off. And in those instances, I think medication can really bring the symptoms down by even 20% to make it easier to change, to make it easier to listen to your therapist and bring this change into your life. So I'm a believer in both, and it's unfortunate in psychiatry that medications have this like negative stigma. There's been a lot of critique as to whether psych medications work altogether. There's a researcher from Harvard who says it's all placebo. I mean, I could tell you that in my line of work, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if the efficacy of what I was doing was 50-50. And speaking against the placebo, I can tell you also that there's plenty of medications that don't work, and there's medications that do. And I truly see patients experience both. And I should say, though, that the emphasis is so much on just incorporating multimodal treatments, where it's not just medication. And I think maybe the way psychiatry has been treated by the insurance industry, they ended up just having 15-minute med checks. I think that's doing people a tremendous disservice, because I think there's so much more than just the substance. So I think as a field that we're also becoming a lot more self-aware, and right. I think the days of the stigma around psych meds is almost like should we criticize people for wearing eyewear or eyeglasses? And so many psych meds truly just make it easier for people to see.
That's actually a good point, because I wonder, and I've certainly seen this in my practice, for example, with clients who suffer from ADHD, that medication actually really makes a difference. So are there certain conditions that really, let's say, require medication, or where medication can make a huge difference in terms of quality of life, functioning, well-being, and so on?
So ADHD, you're right. ADHD responds quite rapidly to interventions. It's almost, it's a difficult comparison, because one of the issues I think with psych medications is that it's a delayed feedback loop. In other words, you need to take an SSRI for about a month before you see a benefit, and the benefit creeps up on you. So it's gradual. It's not like you wake up one day and you're like, wow, I'm cured, my anxiety is gone, but rather it kind of crept up on you. And the way people remember things, there's almost like, I think it's been called a recency bias or a recall bias, but the way we feel now, we tend to think this is how it's always been. And what I see so many times is when patients get better from medications or therapy, they almost forgot how they used to be. And their immediate answer is like, well, I could just stop all that stuff because I'm fine. There's nothing wrong now. So to answer your question, I think certain medications, especially the ones for like the short acting things, so the things for like ADHD, the stimulants, as I tell my patients, like in 2 hours, you will see the difference. People with insomnia that take an Ambien in one night, in 3 hours, they will see the difference. And the downside of the SSRIs is that it takes longer. It takes about a month. And that's where I think people lose patience, or they lose the perspective to say, am I actually better from this medicine? Because the onset is relatively slower. But to come back to who needs medication, I think, to be honest, I think anybody that's looking at a significant family history of something, whether it's depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar disorder, that's the first criteria. Like, what is the genetic loading? I think it's important for everybody to try everything behavioral they can to optimize things, including good sleep, exercise, meditation practice, therapy. But at some point, I think out of pure, just like love of humans, like at some point, it's torture to tell somebody just to try something else, not medication, because there's people that have suffered for a long time. And unfortunately, with mental health, we're still kind of emerging from the times where it's okay to say that there's an issue with something.
Yeah, I think the genetics and the epigenetics is an interesting component, and things like affective spectrum disorder, right, where people are liable or at risk to experience a whole range of disorders, including some that are more physiological, like irritable bowel syndrome, right? So this is, I think, something we still don't understand well, but is important to look at. You touched on something else that I wanted to follow up on, and that's sleep. Yeah, you mentioned Ambien. So sleep is obviously, or insomnia, I should say, a problem that affects a lot of people in the US and worldwide, really. And I know you put special emphasis on that because it's so important for mental health. Tell me a little bit more about that relationship.
Oh man, I mean, it overlaps like every possible system domain in the mind and the body. So if we're going to look at the body, I mean, people that are sleep deprived, of which about a 1/3 of Americans, I think, are. I mean, you're looking at like, metabolic issues, weight gain, low testosterone, low sex drive, impaired immunity. The list goes on and on. Mentally, we're looking at things like poor memory, poor recall. I think anyone that doesn't get enough sleep, like, looks like they have ADHD, or I've had many like 20-year-olds come in telling me they think they have dementia because they forgot people's names and why they walked into a room. And the immediate question is immediately just how much sleep are you getting? And is it restorative, high quality sleep? On an emotional level, sleep plays a tremendous role because sleep really empowers our ability for discipline and to inhibit impulses. It gives us control over our impulses. So I think, there's so many potential wormholes that we can fall down each day, whether snapping at somebody or being irritated by something, or we're not repeatedly thinking about some anxiety or some anxious event. Good sleep gives you the power to fight the fight. I think really what distinguishes a lot of, the higher primates from the rest of the animal world is that we've got these frontal lobes that allow you to delay gratification, that allow you to say, I'm not going to say this now because this is not the smart thing to do. There's so much data that shows that, sleep deprived people are impulsive, and the impact of diminished impulse control is tremendous, I think, in our relationships, in our work, and in our lives, and even in how we think about ourselves. Because I think a lot of people can be quick to criticize themselves, all these negative mantras that we can all manifest in our minds. All of us know the right thing to do. The question is, do you have the willpower to resist the impulse and do it? And I think sleep is a superpower in that regard.
You bring up such a good point, because that also touches on the risk of misdiagnosis. And as you said, people being hard on themselves. So let's say somebody comes and they look like ADHD, but really they're chronically sleep deprived, or they're ruminating. And then the risk might be that they get diagnosed with depression, but actually they're chronically sleep deprived. We also know it increases anxiety. So there is this risk that people get misdiagnosed when really at the very core of it is sleep. Or sleep
and
deprivation.
1/3 of people walking around have this issue. Like that's the part that blows my mind. Like 1/3 of Americans are not getting enough sleep. And right. The thing about sleep, not to dwell on sleep completely, but the sneaky thing about sleep is that they've shown that sleep deprived people don't know how sleepy they are. I'm not even talking about all the sleep deprived people online at Starbucks, drinking like, 2 ventis a day. I'm fine, doc. The answer is no, you're still drinking 40 ounces of coffee a day. One thing that I think has been essential to my work, and I would hope to anybody listening to this podcast, would be, we should all make the distinction of, there's depression, which is more sadness and low mood. And then there's fatigue, and then there's sleepiness. And those three can so often look like the same thing. Just to briefly touch on this, sleepiness means you tend to doze off. If we let you to your own devices, you're dragging through the day. If we said, Katya, here's a couch and a pillow, do you want to take a nap? You would fall asleep. That is sleepiness. Fatigue is different. Fatigue is people that say, oh, they're low energy, but they're not really sleepy. Anxious people tend to have a lot of fatigue. They'll say that, oh, doc, I'm exhausted. I'm so sleepy. But then you give them an opportunity to nap and they can't. And you find out at night they have insomnia and they can't sleep. So they're not actually sleepy, they're fatigued. And then I think sadness and depression is a whole different thing, because there I think there's actually sadness, right? And oftentimes one of the things that differs between these groups is that the depressed people will say they don't care to do things. They don't look forward to things. The tired and sleepy people will say they want to do things, but they're exhausted. So there's a difference in the motivation, I think, and the desire. But I think for so many people, like I think the tremendous benefit of what we provide our patients with is just understanding. When you say, I don't feel right, it's so important to break that down. And sleep, I think, and energy is such a fundamental part of that assessment.
I agree. Yeah, and to really understand it, right? I love the definition and also the differentiation of the drivers and the motivation, right? And the other thing that I often hear, and this is maybe interesting, is people come and they say, I can't sleep, right? And they say, really? Oh, I don't sleep. Huh? And I'm like, at all, right? And so there's also the whole cognitive spectrum that plays a role of the beliefs that form around not being able to sleep. And then, of course, people are sleeping, because if they didn't, I think we have 3 days and then we go insane or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
I forget what the limit is, but the Guinness Book of World Records doesn't let you do this for contest anymore, because people have died from true sleep deprivation. And it doesn't require 2 years to reach that unfortunate point. So to anyone that's afraid they're going to die of not sleeping, that never happens, fortunately. And I think it's important to recognize
that's
that.
Good to know.
About sleep, I keep these here. I mean, I keep my Chinese finger traps that I always show people. So, the harder you force it, the worse it is, right? And a lot of people with insomnia obsess about sleep all day, and they don't sleep well at night. And many books and things that we read in the news will scare people into thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die if I don't sleep tonight. And the answer is, well, no, you're not. And the less pressure you put on it, the better your sleep will be. It's paradoxical in that way.
Exactly. So talking about the media, I want to dive into a topic that also gets a lot of media attention and has been for a long time, and that's shifted and changed as culture and politics have shifted and changed: psychedelics. So first of all, we have to understand, and not all my listeners might know this, that there is huge amounts of research going on, including by the Veterans Administration and many, many other very, very important organizations. So it's obviously a topic that gets a lot of importance. And we have one psychedelic that's legalized that we can use in therapy. But first of all, tell me, what are psychedelics offering that's currently missing?
It's a great question. And there's a couple of fascinating quotes from the book Michael Pollan, which how to change your mind, that I just can't forget. Among them, the issue for most people by the time they're 40 is that, well, nothing surprises you anymore. And that's exactly the problem, that nothing surprises you anymore. He says, that, and it's so true. We like, look at your children. If you have kids, right? Your kids are so present, but they're so ineffective. It's like, guys, pack up your stuff and let's get going. And that doesn't happen. But yet they're captivated by the novelty and beauty of the world around them. And they're not stressed and they're not anxious and they're doing just fine if you leave them alone. I think we're all, to some extent, our lives are this beautiful arc between the novelty and beauty of childhood and the efficiency and automation of being an adult. And ultimately, it might be somewhere in the middle that we find happiness. Psychedelics have been shown to rewire the brain to a certain point. To get back to the Pollan book, he describes that, many neuronal pathways, many of our own habits, he's compared to like a ski hill. And when there's like the main trail that everyone goes down all the time. It gets worn in. And as soon as something goes wrong, that's your default method of reacting and dealing and so on. Psychedelics encourage you to explore the backwoods and alternative paths and alternative solutions. And that comes back to that, I think there was a book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, right? Which speaks to the tremendous need to reintroduce novelty and newness of the moment, to have this attitude of like curiosity and appreciation for something as simple as the leaves on a tree, which I'm afraid as adults, we all tend to get too busy to notice anymore. And I think that's where psychedelics have a tremendous potential to help people evolve and learn. One of the things I'm curious your thoughts on this. I've read that like one of the most essential things for humans in their lifetime is the ability to learn and the ability to change with that. And a theme that's come up before is like people with ADHD. Do they remember even what was said in the last session? Right. So you wonder, like, what are the benefits of therapy to somebody that doesn't even remember, did they learn anything? The answer is probably not. So things are stuck. I think that the well-guided psychedelic experience, and I can't speak enough to the importance of proper guidance. To me, psychedelics are a trifecta of music, therapy, and the medicine. And if any one of those pieces is off, I think people can get in a lot of trouble. But I think that, these experiences really let people kind of like evolve, and they create such a powerful experience that I think a lot of the material that's brought up is sticky, and it's things that last with people. The dark side of that is if people have a bad trip or a challenging trip, as some will call it, that too can have lasting effects. And that's why it's important to make sure that the set and setting and the people that are involved are well-trained and knowledgeable.
I think that's really key, right? When we think about the dangers or the risks of psychedelics, there is one thing you kind of implicitly touched on, the quick fix, right? What you were describing really is a change in perspective almost, and that doesn't necessarily happen overnight, right? We know, for example, I'm diving deep into ketamine right now, that the one session quick fix is not really a reality. It's really a therapy, right? And then there's the other risk and danger of bad guides. Are you in a very vulnerable state when you're taking psychedelics, because lots of things are shut down, right? And then to have somebody who abuses that or even abuses that in the integration is really, really dangerous. So having, therapists or people who are properly trained, I think is key. The other thing you bring up, and I have a slightly different trifecta, but I think it overlaps, is for me, it's the trifecta of psychedelics, mindfulness, and therapy, because those are, right, and this also counters the fix, because the mindfulness really helps you to stay present when the trip is bad or difficult, right? Because they do happen. And the therapy really also helps with the integration of what comes up, and then themes from therapy, at least in my own experience, then show up and suddenly get, integrated or deepened in a very profound way.
That's a very good point. I can tell you from my experience with using ketamine with my patients, even a difficult trip in a right holding environment is a learning experience. And that's where truly like the therapy around it is so essential. I've joked also, like, with some of the worst, most difficult experiences I've seen people have, sometimes coming back to normalcy is in and of itself the lesson, and a newfound appreciation for, I'm glad that dream is over. To me, psychedelics and the work around it is almost like dreaming. And surely we all know that there are the nightmares that we're grateful to wake up from. Sometimes that in and of itself is a learning case.
The other thing I kind of am really interested in is that we have this ability as human beings to have these non-ordinary states of mind, or sometimes they're called holotropic states of mind, right? But basically these states of mind that are not like our regular consciousness, where we have the narrator and the control and so on. And we don't need psychedelics to get to these states of mind. Religious or spiritual awe can take us there, holotropic breathing. So since we have that ability, and then nature has provided us with all these medicines, right? So psilocybin, ayahuasca, peyote, I mean, I could list 10 more, right? So one could argue we have a right, or maybe even a necessity, to experience these states.
I think you're very onto something there, which is, what I've often wondered is all these different substances, the serotonergic ones. Again, we're not talking about opium here. We're talking about psychedelics, which work on the serotonin system. One theory I've had is like, why do all these different substances converge on a relatively similar experience? The other thing to bear in mind is that dreaming on fMRI studies, our REM, dream sleep, looks like a psychedelic state. And if you think about it, dreams are kind of trippy, for lack of other definition, right? Dreams are a bit fantastical. things are intense and large and distorted and odd and weird, and dreams are weird a lot of the times. One theory is that really psychedelics just kind of click that switch so you experience a waking dream. And I kind of buy into that because it seems odd that this randomly, like all these, like a psychedelic state is a pretty like well-defined experience, irrespective of whether it's going to be ayahuasca or psilocybin. There is some general overlap to a lot of these substances, and the effects that come out. So my belief there is that I think we're just finding a lot of external keys for an internal lock. And I think that the ability, I think humans have an innate ability for this. I think at night when you're dreaming, I think this is maybe what's happening.
I love that perspective.
And we can attain these states naturally. So how did mystics used to do this? You know, like don't eat for 5 days, don't sleep for 5 days, be extremely hot, be extremely cold. There's something also about our evolution, it appears, that when the human brain is really under duress, it seems to produce some natural DMT is one compound that is endogenous to the brain, dimethyltryptamine, gram for gram, the strongest psychedelic known to humankind, but our brains make it. And there was a book written by Rick Strassman, which refers to DMT as the spirit molecule. The theory there is that when we're born and our head is being squeezed, the brain oozes DMT, and when we die or when we're having a near-death experience, the brain under extreme duress produces DMT. And why that happens, I don't know, but they do suggest that might kind of result in the near-death experiences that people often see, the white light, the angels, the tunnels, and so on. But I think the magical thing about this genre of medicines is that they're unlocking essentially an innate state that we have. And I think for anybody that undergoes a psychedelic session or has had a psychedelic session, they would understand that there is something dreamlike about the whole thing. And people, even in my office on ketamine, they're almost like in a trance-like state, which is somewhere between wake and sleep. And you're just dreaming while you're awake.
Absolutely. Well, I could talk for another hour to you, but I know we have to wrap up. I want to ask you 3 quick questions. You don't have to make them quick, but they're 3 questions. And those are questions I think about a lot. Why is it important to befriend our emotions? What does that mean to you? And what are your favorite tools?
So I believe in the boogeyman model of therapy. And what I say about the boogeyman is, like, you know, when we were little kids, we were all afraid of the dark. We were afraid of what was under the bed, what was in the closet. Ignorance is scary. Ignorance works on a short-term basis, but the long-term outcome of you being afraid of the dark is you'll never be alone in your room and you'll never walk down that hallway. The beauty of it is, I think that as adults, fortunately, many of us have outgrown at least the fear of the dark. And the reason we outgrew it is because we faced it. Because at some point, some adult or parent or friend took you by the hand and said, let's go look in that closet and see what's there. And then, and when you looked, you realized, well, okay, there's nothing there. And there's nothing under your bed. So to me, a lot of therapy is actually, it's hand-holding people through these difficult experiences. And that, I think, really speaks to the importance of befriending our emotions. I think as long as you run, you keep running. And I think we see that with people even in darkness, right? Like the more you run from the dark, your own running scares you at some point and you run faster. I still remember this from when I was a kid. But yeah, I think putting light to things is so essential. And anybody that's got any kind of odd belief or weird thought or fear or phobia, as soon as you can write about it, recognize it, discuss it, talk about it with your friends, your therapist, your family, it starts to melt away. And if it's significant enough, it might not be so easy. And that's where obviously you go see a therapist or a psychiatrist, but you escalate. But at minimum, I think, I don't know, there's always a joke that I use, which is, you know, how many shrinks does it take to change a light bulb? Well, none, because the light bulb has to want to change.
We have the same joke about therapists, so I think we're on the same page there.
But I think there's even another caveat to that, which is a lot of people are light bulbs and they don't even know it. And I think it's so important for people to just be self-aware. And that I think that comes back to that importance of understanding that, hey, I have feelings and they change. That's a beginning. That's a starting point where I think many people don't even get that far.
Love that. Alex, how can people get in touch with you if they want to see you, ask you for an interview, invite you to speak at their company?
Sure, sure. Yeah, my website, we are siliconpsych.com. Our email is info@siliconpsych.com. And yeah, if you look us up under any of those or Menlo Park Psychiatry and Sleep Medicine, you can find us.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Actually, my pleasure. And gosh, there's so much more to say about this. And I think we're both so privileged to, I think our fields are so privileged to be at this time in history when something so big is coming down the pipeline. So we'll be excited to see how it goes.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me here. And it is an absolute pleasure.